everybody. Welcome to Inspiring Adventures. I'm Melissa Reyes, and today I have the honor to introduce you to Pati Poblete, the author of this book, A Better Place. And she's going to be joining me right now from San Francisco Bay Area. And here she is, Pati Poblete. Thank you so much for being here, Pati.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, I'm really inspired by your story. It was very touching when I first heard about it, and I'm anxious to hear why you wrote the book. I mean, it obviously was a healing process for you, but it was really intrigued because, you know, my blog and my reason for writing has always been about finding what I'm passionate about and what my purpose in life is about, and you speak to that. So can you tell me a little bit about you, what your background is, and then we'll talk about what the book's about.
Sure. So the bulk of my career has been in journalism, and I've always loved writing. I majored in English just so that I could spend my time in college writing and reading. And so for more than 10 years, I was a journalist at different newspapers. The most recent one before I left journalism was the San Francisco Chronicle. And at the San Francisco Chronicle, I had my own column. So I was writing from my own perspective, and I was also on the editorial board. So my career, even in writing, has always been for a purpose. You know, either I wanted to affect some kind of change and I wanted to incite the public to take action. And even when I left journalism, my career was all about advocacy, because after I left journalism, I became the media advocacy director for the American Cancer Society. And I was working with legislators to you know, on healthcare reform legislation and writing letters to the editor and helping volunteers to have their voices heard. And then from the Cancer Society, I was hired by an international organization called Global Footprint Network. And I was actually working with national governments in different countries to form their environmental sustainability policies. So my whole career has been about in making some kind of improvement in the way we live and to create a better future for our children. And when this happened, when this tragedy struck our family, I honestly moved away from advocacy, because when tragedy strikes like that, you kind of lose your faith, you lose your sense of community, and for a long time I lost my sense of hope in the future. And so to be involved in anything that had to do with improving the future, to me, felt futile, because I just had no hope left. And so gradually it led me toward writing this book.
Mm-hmm. Well, the book is A Better Place, a memoir of peace in the face of tragedy, and it goes through the background from when you moved as a child to the town that you raised your children in, Vallejo, California, and that's where your son Robby was murdered. And you picked up the story there and how that, you know, tragic steps, you know, the steps that took place when that happened, and my chills, you know, going down my spine, having just read that the last few days, just kind of is really fresh in my mind, and just I can't even find the words now. I knew I wasn't going to be able to find the words, but you know, you have such a beautiful way of writing and expressing yourself, and caring for the reader, explaining what's going to happen as you read it. You did a great job. So,
thank you.
No, yeah, really, thank you for doing that. Thank you for writing the book. I know it must have been difficult, but you did say it was healing. So what drove you to really go through this whole process? Must have been really difficult.
Sure. So actually, when my son was killed, we had moved to a new home just one city over from Vallejo, and it's a 20-minute drive from where we live now to the city of Vallejo. And when we got the call that he was shot, we had to. There's a 20-minute stretch of highway on Interstate 80 that separates our home from Vallejo. And I remember that day, and there was traffic, and we were weaving in and out of traffic just to get to that crime scene. And as you can imagine, I was frantic, you know. And so for almost 2 years after my son was killed, I couldn't go down that stretch of highway. And I avoided going back to the city that was really my home for more than 30 years, just because it triggered so much. I had horrible PTSD, and I had panic attacks, and I had anxiety. And so I stayed home, and because we didn't know who did this for more than a year. And I stayed home, and I began writing letters to my son. And because that's all I knew, I didn't know what else to do. I was so used to seeing my son every day, or being able to pick up the phone and call him. And I couldn't do that anymore. So the only thing I could do was to write to him. And it just became very sad, on top of sad, because I was asking him all these questions, and I was, saying things that I wanted responses to, and I realized I was never going to get a response, and it just became too difficult. And so then what I started doing was I started going into bookstores. And when you're a mom, when you're a parent and your child leaves the house, you're always, where are you going? When are you going to come home? Are you going to be okay? And you want to know where they're going and if they're okay. And the interesting thing is, when your child dies, that doesn't change. And for me, I wanted to know where he went, and if he was okay, and if he could still see me. And so I became really immersed in these books about near-death experiences and what happens to a soul once the body is gone. And I really immersed myself in those books. But I was also looking for very raw stories from people about, what happens to a family when someone is taken so brutally and tragically. And I couldn't find that book. All I could find in terms of dealing with grief afterward were very religious books, which I didn't want to read at the time, because I was very angry at God, and I didn't want to hear that this was his plan. And, I didn't want to read anything religious. And then on the other end of the spectrum were self-help books, and I didn't want to read that either. I just wanted a true, raw story of what happens, when you suffer this kind of loss. And so basically, I began to write the book that I wish I could have accessed when I went to a bookstore. And the intention is not to say this is the way and follow my path. It's because everyone is different and grief is handled differently. The purpose of my book really is that there is hope. Whichever way you find it, there is hope. And however you feel, whether it's anger or depression or grief or panic or happiness, it's all okay. We have to go easier on ourselves, and you're not alone. And that's really what I wanted for this book. And also for people, family members who don't know what to say when this happens to someone they love. Oops, there's my phone. But yes, because a lot of people didn't know what to say to me, and so they stayed away. Or some people said things that were very offensive to me, and they didn't realize it. So it's also intended for those people. How do you be there for a loved one when they're going through such a tragedy? And I really felt like that needed to be said also.
Gosh, I hope I didn't say any of the offensive things.
Yeah.
One doesn't know the right things to say, and certainly maybe there isn't a right thing to say at any time. But what were some things, that just brings up a question in my mind, because of course, as you were speaking, I had lots of questions, but let me ask that. What are some things somebody should say? What should they say, or what shouldn't they? What did? Let's talk about the positive, but what consoled you? What helped you? What things did people say that did help, or that were helpful at the time?
Well, I think
as you went through all of it.
Before I get into that, I have to say some of the things that were hard to take, just so that you can understand why the positive things were positive for me.
They're the cliche things and the really super
right, and I know that I've said them myself. But for example, the thing that really got me was, because I was raised Catholic, so I was surrounded by a lot of Catholicism during that time, and I guess in Catholicism, or the way you interpret it, a lot of people were telling me, well, this was God's plan. This is what God wanted. And I just thought, and that was hard for me to take, because for me, it's just, well, what kind of God would allow this to happen? Why us? And this notion in Catholicism, or the way they interpreted that suffering is an honor, and God would only bestow that upon you if he knew you could take it, which to me too was very hard to digest and to understand. And then one woman said to me, I almost lost my son too, but we were blessed. And that to me was just, well, what does that say about us? You know, are we not blessed? Are, you know, and so that was very hard. That was very hard. And then this notion of comparing pain, you know, when people would say, well, I lost my dad, and just not too long ago, or I lost this person, because when you're feeling, when you're in the midst of that kind of tragic loss, it doesn't help, you know, to compare pain, and because pain is pain and grief is grief, no matter what. And so some of the things that did help me were people who just listened. You know, they didn't feel the need to say anything. You know, they just sat with me and held my hand, or rubbed my back, or came over and cooked me food, you know. And it's just knowing that they were there and that they didn't have to fill in the awkward silences. And I think that's the hard thing in our society. Pain is difficult for people to, it's uncomfortable, you know, especially pain that's brought on by something so tragic. And what ended up happening is a lot of my relationships were affected. People who I thought were really going to be there never, you know, after the funeral, I never saw them again because they just didn't know what to say to me. And that hurt a lot, you know, and it was almost easier to accept kindness from strangers because they didn't have that history with us and they just wanted to be a friend, you know. And so it's you find that out, unfortunately, when tragedy happens, that some people just can't take it, and it's not that they're mean or their intention is bad, but this society isn't conditioned to be comfortable around tragedy or pain, and they just don't know what to say.
Oh, I can relate on my own levels. I have to say I've never gone through what you've gone through, and I just cannot even imagine. I want to just hold you. And but I did think about some things that were very similar in that drive. When I got the call that my dad was in the hospital and I had to go to be with him and he died.
Yeah.
And it was a 2-hour drive.
Oh gosh.
And it was like, get here fast. And that I didn't believe it, that I thought it couldn't be him. I thought they were mistaking. It must be somebody else. And they, you know,
yes,
they were like, no, it's definitely your dad. You need to get here fast. And I thought, I just have to beat the clock, you know, and get, but he was he was brain dead. They kept him alive, but, you know, but we got there as soon as we could, and being in traffic and just trying to get there as fast as you can and not knowing what the outcome was going to be. I definitely went through that.
Yeah.
So I picture being in that car and feeling those feelings and all the phone calls.
Right.
Trying to talk to people and just not really remembering what you said,
right.
You know, and not remembering who you talked to and what their names were. But
right.
you know, I remember a lot of that stuff came back. And having had post-traumatic stress disorder myself, that a lot of that came up too while I was reading your book, thinking about, you know, what that feels like physically and emotionally. So, but again, I think lots of things can trigger that for different people. So, you know, and I know, like, it's just nobody can relate to what anybody went through. For, you know, everybody's life is different, and you know, I have that Catholic background too, and sometimes the words just don't seem to feel right or sound right at the time. And we say them because we don't know, I guess, like what's the right thing, or I don't know. We're conditioned to say certain things, but they really don't make sense at all.
Right.
You are such a forgiving person, and not only forgiving just for the people that, you know, maybe didn't say the right thing, but, you know, you went on to heal yourself through forgiveness of the people that caused this tragedy. You tried to forgive, and then ended up having a relationship with people that were related to them. Did you want to talk about that?
Actually, it turned out that I can't talk too much about it because we haven't had the jury trial yet, but it ended up that one of the suspects is the nephew of one of my best friends, and neither she nor I could have anticipated that. And she was one of I mean, she was one of my friends who was there for me from the very beginning. You know, she flew to be by my side, and she would pay for spa treatments for me just to make sure that I was taking care of myself. And when we got the call a year later that the arrests were made, I didn't, and they went through the list of names, I didn't recognize the first three, but when they came down to the fourth, I realized that that was her nephew. And
Oh, wow.
and to, you know, just, it's almost Shakespearean in how tragic it was, because it was already tragic, and then it's almost like twisting the knife even more, you know. And I didn't know how we could continue being friends, you know, and we could never go back to what we were. You know, I met her when I was in high school, and we were actually roommates in college.
Wow.
And I never knew, I just didn't know how it would pan out, but I knew in my head that that our relationship was separate from that, and this wasn't her doing. It was someone in her family, but it wasn't her.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to sort that out in my head and in my heart, and I wanted to be the one to tell her that it was her nephew and not have her find out from the news or anyone else. So the first thing I did after we spoke to the detectives after that was to call her and to tell her that that she was still my sister, you know, and that nothing would change. And that was hard. You know, we were both on the phone just crying for like an hour, not saying a word. And but that's just another, you know, another twist. And I just kept thinking, gosh, how much more can we take? And but I was okay in my heart, because I knew, well, it wasn't her, you know, it was someone in her family, and I just had to sort that out in my head.
Yeah, wow. And it's kind of a small town, and you know, I don't know, maybe everyone is connected in a certain way, and with the chances that turned out to be, you know, like you said, Shakespearean, my gosh, you never expected that.
Right.
But you know, so you had to have another level of openness, and yet you found that in you. And you know, you had, I think, a wonderful support system and relationship with Robby's father and your daughter, and you know, your husband now, and all the people in your life. And I think you know, that also your background with the advocacy, I think that who you are had something to do with how you handled this.
Yeah, you know, it's not, I cringe a little when people say, oh, you're so brave or you're so strong, because honestly, in the beginning, it was a matter of survival. And I went through everything that was natural. I was angry. I was depressed. I had anxiety. I was sad. And the questions wouldn't, especially right after the arrests were made, you know, and to hear the details of what happened. And even now, you know, the trial is supposed to start in a few weeks. And so I don't know how I'll handle that one. I'm really anxious about that. But you kind of face a crossroad. You know, you can decide at that point, am I gonna wake up and be fueled by my anger and my quest for revenge, or am I gonna wake up and fight to seek forgiveness and compassion and try to break the cycle? Because in my mind, and I looked up these men's names, you know, after I found out who they were, and I saw that they had, all of them, they had long histories of being in the criminal justice system, and since they were very young. And all I could think of is, you know, if someone had given them an opportunity, if they had learned a job skill, if someone had helped them along, you know, and not to say they're not accountable for their actions, because they are, but we are all a product of what society makes us, you know, and all I could think of is they have faced struggles from the time they were born. And instead of me asking myself, what could I have done to save my son? What did I do wrong? I had to take a broader look and think about, well, what as a society have we done to fail the four men who killed him? You know, because that is a level of desperation that I can't understand. And but to do nothing after this has happened to us would be would be horrible in my eyes. And so I made the decision to start this foundation in Robby's name, the Robby Poblete Foundation. And I always say, you know, it has his name, but it really is geared toward helping the men who killed him.
Wow. That's really, I'm sorry. I know, hearing you say that, it's really powerful. It really is. It's in his name, but it's geared towards helping the people who did that to him.
Yeah, you know, I have a daughter still too, and it could be, I would not blame anyone, any parent who goes through this, any sibling who loses their brother or sister, if they spent the rest of their lives being angry or depressed. I could not blame them, because it's such a, it's like losing your limb and you're spending the rest of your life trying to figure out where it went, you know, and you have to find a new way to move and a new way to exist. And the much harder road is to try to understand where these men were coming from, and to try to seek compassion and forgiveness, and to turn that grief into something that can actually help people. And it's a lot of work. And but for me, it was the only choice, because I didn't want to ruin the rest of my daughter's life by seeing her mother angry and depressed, and she's already lost a brother, and I didn't want her to lose a mother too. And so it was for her as much as it was for my son, and for self-preservation, really, but it's helped me a lot.
Well, and he's such a wonderful person. Of course, any child that we have or whatever is a wonderful person, but you honor him so well by describing what he was like. I feel kind of like I had got a chance to know him through you and through your writing. And I think that the foundation is going to help for many people to discover, you know, you and your family and Robby's legacy. You know, I think it's really neat. So tell us a little bit about what the foundation is going to be doing.
Well, we just passed the 1 year mark. And so when I finally, the reason the foundation came about was because of the book. And I was nearing the end of the book, and it was the second to the last chapter. And I think at that point I still hadn't driven through Vallejo. And I think in the course of writing the book, I was thinking to myself, but I was writing. And I just said, well, what if going to Vallejo isn't going toward tragedy anymore, which was what was burning in my mind, you know, that memory of driving toward tragedy. What if I create something so that now I drive to Vallejo for hope? You know, what if I'm driving toward something positive and something that helps the community? Would that make it easier for me to return? And when I was writing that chapter, I really was just thinking out loud, and I thought, okay, the Robby Poblete Foundation, and there's 3 components to it. And the first one is with the goal of reducing gun violence, obviously, because my son was killed by gun violence. And for me, the low-hanging fruit was a gun buyback, because most police departments don't have a budget to have regular gun buybacks. And if you look at statistics, a lot of the crime that is caused is caused by illegal firearms, or firearms that are stolen from homes that are just laying around and not kept safely, or taken from cars. And so if we would have these gun buybacks that would allow both gun owners a safe place to dispose of these firearms that they no longer want, so they, you know, preventing them from falling into the wrong hands, or anyone, honestly, if they just don't want their guns anymore, this is the place to bring them, and there would be no questions asked. That was the first part. The second part, I thought, well, I met with a friend of mine who used to be with law enforcement, and I said, well, what happens to the guns after they collect them? And he said they go to a warehouse where they're dismantled, they're decommissioned, and then they're sold for scrap metal. And at the time, my son was learning how to weld, and he was collecting a lot of scrap metal to make art, you know, garden art and different things in the house. So I thought, well, what if, is there a way for me to get the materials from the guns so that I could start a program and I could distribute them amongst artists, and we could create art and transform these things that could have taken a life and transformed them into pieces of art that could educate and inspire. And so that took a little finagling, because it's unusual to have that kind of contract with these weapons destruction companies, but I did it, and that's what we call the Art of Peace. And we're just about to unveil our first Art of Peace exhibit on May 11, and it's going to be amazing. What I did was I put out a call for artists in the San Francisco Bay Area, thinking I would get a few local people, but I got submissions from around the world. I don't even know how they found out about it. And there was a Russian woman who now lives in Germany who said she fled Russia because of violence that she saw against children, and she wanted to submit a piece. And there was an Iranian immigrant who, along with his friends, fled the country because of all the political turmoil, only to be killed by gun violence here in America. And so the one surviving friend wanted to build something in honor of his friends who were killed in New York. They were shot. And so I didn't expect all the different personal stories of how gun violence has impacted these artists and who they would be making these pieces of art for. That was unexpected for me. And so that's Art of Peace. And then the third component is just what I was talking about in terms of gearing the foundation toward helping the suspects, is the vocational program, which I call Work in Progress. And as I said, my son was learning how to weld at the time he died. And so we have partnered directly with labor unions, the workforce development boards, the school boards, school districts, and we're going into schools and we're having career fairs and we're telling them about all these opportunities. College is great, but not for everyone. And if you're not going to go to college, you have other options. And these are options that pay you while you learn. And we're talking about construction, carpentry, electrical, sheet metal work, iron work. You know, there are so many trades, and that's what my son was just getting into. And so now we've launched that program, and we're affecting a lot of students who never knew that these things existed. They used to be in our schools, if you remember, like auto mechanics and wood shop, and they took those out a long time ago. So we have generations of children who have never heard about these opportunities.
So true. Kids are learning how to use tools because they're taking drama and they're learning it in set design, but there's no wood shop. Yeah. It's crazy that they would have, I would never expect that that's where they would learn it, but luckily there's somebody there willing to teach that. And so you're absolutely right. There's no way to learn those things, and you're giving them so much opportunity. It's amazing. And you know, you said something that really triggered my interest in finding out more about what you're doing, and something I have never heard before, and that was putting grief into action. And so, you know, I think that we a lot of times need to promote action, not just, you know, talking about something or inspiring people, but also moving them to action. And that's what you're doing, not only yourself, pulling yourself from grief, because the grief doesn't end, but to make it into something that helps. And so that's really amazing.
Thank you.
What can we expect next, and how can we help you, and how can we help spread the word of what's happening with the foundation?
Sure. So as I said, on May 11, you might have viewers, you probably have a lot of viewers here in the Bay Area. So on May 11, we'll be unveiling the inaugural Art of Peace exhibit in downtown Vallejo. It starts at 5:30 p.m. You can go on our website, www.robby, R-O-B-B-Y, Poblete, P-O-B-L-E-T-E, foundation.org to get more information about that. It's going to be an amazing night. In addition to unveiling the pieces of art, I've put together a healing ceremony, and what that is I've invited a group of victims and survivors of gun violence. So these are mothers, these are siblings, these are people who have been shot and have survived, and they're all going to be coming, and we're going to give them fragments of these gun pieces. All of these guns have been connected to some kind of crime, and we're going to give it to them, and one by one they're going to place them in a furnace, and we're going to watch them melt out and transformed so that they're never going to be used again to harm someone. And during that ceremony, there's going to be a healing drum circle around us. So there will be a beat of the drum, and each survivor, after they put the gun into the furnace, is going to take their seat and add to the beats. And so that beat will get stronger and stronger with each survivor. And it's just to, it's sad and it's powerful at the same time. Sad because the louder the beat gets, the more there's one more survivor, which means there's one more victim.
Right.
But at the same time, here we are in this community event, and we're healing together. So I see both the dark and the light in that ceremony. Mm-hmm. And we have 2 gun buybacks that are scheduled again this year, and we're just expanding and expanding. Our Art of Peace program has been adopted by several counties, and our vocational is expanding too. So what you can do to help is to go to the website and look at the events. If you want to participate, we would love that. Or if you're in a county or a city that wants a gun buyback or would be interested in having an Art of Peace program, or us coming and talking about opportunities in the trades, please reach out. All of our contact information is there.
Well, I was very impressed by all of your social media. She's on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, so there's some place that you can share this and find out more. Wherever you're seeing me now, you can definitely connect with Patti and the Robby Poblete Foundation. So thank you so much. You mentioned a lot that about Robby's spirituality and the different things that he was interested in, and how you felt like he kind of guided you through the writing process of the book. You wanted to touch on that a little bit, because I think that's very powerful.
Yeah, when at the time of his death, he had a big stack of books by his headboard, and so I was looking at that one night after he was gone, and so he had the Bible, but he also had books on Buddhism and meditation and the Quran and Hinduism, and I think what he was really looking for were the common tenets of all these religions. Mm-hmm. Because he wasn't into dogma. He wasn't into, you have to do this number of prayers and you have to do this and you have to do that. He wasn't into that, but he was into the practices. And he, whenever he felt stressed or aggravated, he would meditate. And when I started reading those books one by one, and he was practicing yoga, which to me was funny because he was a big guy, and I actually found his yoga instructor, and I took the yoga classes that he took, and I was surrounded by all of these very thin young women, and I just couldn't picture him in the middle of all that, but they all remembered him and they all loved him. And so one by one with the books, I started kind of following his footstep, and it was almost like they were breadcrumbs for me. And it's really what helped lead me out of the dark stage in that time, was to follow his practices and to continue reading what he left off. And so my husband and I went to a Buddhist retreat, and we sat in silence for I don't know how many days with Buddhist monks, and that just kind of forced me to face all the feelings that I was feeling, because I was trying to run away from them, and I wouldn't have been there without Robby, and I really feel like he led me there. And even as I was writing the book, I set out an outline for myself, but when I would sit down and start typing, it would go in a totally different direction, and I would think, okay, this is where he wants me to go. And the whole reason I called it A Better Place was because I remembered when he died, and everyone was just saying, he's in a better place, he's in a better place, and they always say that, and really none of us really know until it's our time. But for me, while I'm still here and while I am still breathing and functional, my purpose, I think, is to find a better place here and to create a better place here for my daughter and for our community and for as many people as I can impact. And I think we all have that responsibility, and we just have to find our purpose and our way of doing that.
Yeah, well, I think that's interesting in that you also tell the story of the town and how it's had its ups and downs, and how maybe this is going to help to create that place to be a better place.
Right. Yeah, Vallejo was notorious. It got a lot of unwanted national attention because it was the first city of its size to declare bankruptcy. And so that, I mean, there have been books written about that. And I remember I was a journalist at the time. I was working at the San Francisco Chronicle, and I just thought, gosh, you know, and this is where we lived. And I remember feeling guilt that, you know, this is where we lived, and my children were going to this school, and the public schools, and how are we going to get out of it, you know? And it has suffered a lot of ups and downs, starting with the closure of their naval base. And but I think it's on the upswing. And you know, the fact that I launched this foundation and we had our very first event on Mare Island, which in the beginning of the book is where it all starts falling apart, you know, and it just kind of came full circle for me. And wherever we are, you know, whether it's Vallejo and it's going through all this stuff, or LA or Oakland or another state, you know, we all have our unique challenges in the communities we live. At the same time, we all have our roles that we have to play, whether we acknowledge it or not. And you know, I'm ashamed to admit that I wasn't an active part of the community until this happened, and I wish I was, you know, because I maybe I could have done something differently, and maybe I could have helped the city along a little bit more. But it shouldn't take a tragedy for us to realize that we all have a role to play in the places we call home.
Well, you're there now, and you know, I think that they're a better place because of you. So thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Thank you.
Oh, it's just you're a really amazing lady, and I know, you know, I'm being really careful what words I use because I don't want you to feel like brave and strong and inspiring may not be the words that you want me to use, but you are. You've been through a lot, and yet you are still standing and you're leading the way, and I appreciate that. So Patti, something that I do is share a word of the week. I did a challenge early last year, where I was trying to come up with a word every day, and I ended up taking 52 of those words and making a card deck. So now I take a random card from the deck and make that the word of the week to focus on.
Okay.
And this coming week, when this comes out, it will be, the word happens to be smile.
Oh.
I know. So you have such a pretty smile, and I see pictures of Robby and an awesome smile. So I was wondering if you would give your thoughts on just how smile can inspire someone and help them to focus on positive things in their life.
Yeah, you know, there's that song, you know, smile even though your heart is breaking. And it really does change my whole outlook when I smile. And, you know, I was crying for so long, and it's okay to cry. It's okay to feel sad. But sometimes I remember during that time when a neighbor knocked on the door, and as soon as I opened the door, she was just smiling, and it lit up my whole day. And you just never know, you know, when you're smiling at a stranger, how much you're uplifting their spirit and what they're going through. And so never underestimate the power of your smile. I think it has a lot of power and a lot of kindness in it.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for everything. Thank you for sharing so much of yourself and your family and your time with me here on Inspiring Adventures. This is the book, A Better Place. I keep having my lights are so bright, but it is a beautiful picture here, and it just means so much. And a memoir of peace in the face of tragedy. Thank you.
Thank you.